The human was outnumbered until the alien princess intervened. Alone, stripped of reinforcements, he drifted helplessly in the cold vacuum of space, his ship's hull groaning from repeated strikes. The Virelian Coalition's fleet was vast, a living storm of alien technology and firepower that eclipsed anything humanity had ever built. He had known the mission was dangerous. He had known he was walking into a trap. Still, he had not expected the sheer scale of it, the way the aliens moved in perfect coordination, as if every ship shared one mind. Elia's fingers hovered over the control panel. Every instrument flashed warnings of damage. Every sensor indicated approaching ships with deadly precision. Yet, amid the panic, there was a calmness within him, a certainty that humans possessed in the most desperate moments. He tightened his jaw and pressed the emergency beacon, signaling surrender. It was a gesture, not of weakness, but of defiance. He would not die quietly without making them understand that humanity was never as simple to crush as it appeared. The coalition ships closed in, their engines humming with a low, ominous resonance. Elias watched as the first beam struck, ripping through the side of his ship. Alarms screamed and sparks flew across the console. He had one chance, to survive until capture, to survive long enough to send a warning. Humanity was not yet ready for war, but they were not defenseless. Not yet. When his ship finally shuddered and systems went dark, Elias felt the weight of reality settle on him. The docking clamps of the coalition vessel gripped his hull and pulled him in with mechanical certainty. He had no weapons, no allies, and very little hope. But as he floated into the alien chamber, surrounded by beings who looked like nightmares and legends combined, he refused to bow. The tribunal room was massive, circular, and lit by a light that seemed to pierce the mind as much as the eyes. On every side, creatures of every imaginable form leaned forward, their eyes fixed on him. Some were tall and skeletal, some short and slug-like, others adorned with scales, feathers, or crystalline exoskeletons. Every one of them radiated power, the kind that humans had only seen in stories of gods and monsters. Elias felt a shiver of fear, but he did not let it show. A voice boomed from the center, metallic and cold, speaking in a language he did not understand. Translators immediately provided meaning, carrying the harsh syllables into his ears. "Human," it said, "you stand alone against the might of the Virelian Coalition. You defy our laws, our authority, our will. What have you to say for yourself?" Elias' throat was dry, but he answered steadily, choosing words that carried no fear. "I am here because humans will not bow to threats. You may have power, but we have resolve. I will not surrender knowledge that is not yours to take, and I will not give you fear where none belongs." A murmur rippled through the tribunal. Some of the aliens hissed, others clicked their mandibles in what humans might have called laughter. Yet for all their mockery, there was an unease in the air, a tension that Elias noticed with sharp clarity. The humans had a strange way of standing firm, even when outnumbered, and perhaps the aliens had not expected this. Among the observers, seated on a raised platform that seemed almost ceremonial, was the figure that caught Elias' attention in a way no others did. She was unlike the rest, regal and imposing, yet moving with a grace that made her appear untouchable. Princess Salith, the heir of the Virelian throne, observed him closely. She leaned slightly forward, her eyes narrowing in thought. There was something about this human, something that stirred curiosity rather than contempt. The tribunal's leader, a massive creature with metallic limbs and glowing eyes, slammed a clawed hand onto the console in front of him. "You are sentenced, human. Your life will serve as an example. The galaxy will see that humanity's rise is folly, that no species can stand against the Virelian will." Elias did not flinch. He had expected this. Even in the face of death, he had prepared. "If you wish to show the galaxy my end," he said, his voice steady, "know this: killing me will not stop humans. It will only show them what they must fight against, and that fight will not end here. The tribunal hissed and clicked, words of anger and confusion running across the translated screens before him. The humans were unpredictable, yes, but Elias' calm was unnerving. There was no desperation in him, only clarity, and that alone made some of the aliens shift uncomfortably in their seats. Princess Salith's eyes never left him. She saw courage where others saw recklessness. She saw clarity where others saw defiance. Something about the human's behavior challenged every expectation she had been taught since birth. Humanity had survived so many catastrophes with such meager means, and here was a single human, standing before an entire coalition, unbroken. Elias was dragged forward by alien guards, each step echoing in the vast chamber. The hall itself seemed to react, a living witness to the human's audacity. Every member of the tribunal wanted him crushed, humiliated, and erased, but none could deny the raw force of his presence. The preparations for execution were methodical. The human's technology had been studied, dissected, and rendered useless. Weapons that could have protected him were removed, restraints that could not be broken bound him. The room was silent except for the hum of alien machinery and the occasional hiss of a tribunal member's breathing. Elias could feel their impatience, their hunger for a display of dominance. Yet he felt something else as well, a faint, almost imperceptible admiration from the princess. He thought about his home, the pale blue planet orbiting a modest star, and the billions of humans who would hear of his capture. They would see his courage. They would see the price of defiance. Even alone, he carried the weight of his species' pride, their history of survival against impossible odds. That history was his shield, more effective than any weapon. When the final moment came, when the tribunal commanded him to kneel, Elias remained upright. Every eye in the room focused on him, every alien heart pulsed with the expectation of victory. Yet he did not kneel. He did not bow. He did not fear. His gaze swept across the room, landing finally on Princess Salith, who did not look away. "You may end my life," he said, voice steady and loud enough to carry through the hall. "But you will never understand humanity until you see it not as prey, but as equals. You may outnumber me, but humanity is never alone." The tribunal hissed in rage. Some began issuing commands for immediate action, ready to silence him forever. Yet the princess rose from her seat, her robe flowing like liquid metal, and moved toward the center of the chamber. Her voice was clear, authoritative, and filled with a force the aliens could not ignore. "Stop," she commanded. "This human is under my protection. No harm may come to him by decree of the royal heir." A shocked silence followed. The tribunal members glanced at each other, murmuring in a language Elias could not understand. They were bound by laws older than most of their species, laws that the princess invoked now. The execution, meant to be the final demonstration of Virelian supremacy, was halted by a single voice. Elias' heart pounded, not with relief, but with cautious awareness. The princess had intervened, yes, but the chamber was still filled with those who would see him dead. He was not free. He was only caught in a new form of danger, one far more subtle and insidious than a battlefield. Yet for the first time, he glimpsed an opportunity. One human had been outnumbered, but perhaps, with the intervention of this alien princess, there was hope for more. Princess Salith's eyes studied him. She saw more than defiance. She saw potential, a spark that even the most advanced alien minds could not ignore. In that instant, she decided that this human, alone as he was, would change everything, if only they could survive the political storms to come. The guards relaxed their grip, and Elias felt the tension in his body ease, though only slightly. He knew he was not safe, not truly. Every member of the tribunal still desired his death, still plotted against him. But for the first time, he had an unexpected ally, one whose understanding of the galaxy's politics and power could turn the tide in ways a single human could not. As he was escorted to a holding chamber, Elias glanced back at the princess. She nodded slightly, almost imperceptibly, a silent acknowledgement that she believed in the impossible, that humans could survive where all others would fail, that one human could stand against a galaxy and not fall. And in that moment, as the doors closed and the distant stars shimmered cold and bright outside the reinforced walls of the Coalition ship, Elias Rook understood that survival was not only about skill or strength. It was about spirit. It was about defiance. It was about refusing to bow when the world demanded it. The human was outnumbered, yes. Outgunned, outmatched, surrounded by creatures who had lived for centuries and wielded power beyond imagination. But he was not defeated, not yet. And somewhere, far away from the cold halls of the tribunal, humanity waited, ready to rise, ready to fight, ready to prove that no number of aliens could match the resolve of a single human heart. Princess Salith returned to her private chambers after the tribunal, her mind restless and alive with thought. The human, Elias Rook, had spoken words that echoed far beyond the walls of the chamber. Most humans would have begged, cowered, or panicked. He had done none of those things. His courage, his calm defiance, had intrigued her in a way she had never expected. She paced slowly, her long robe brushing the polished floor, and considered the implications. The Virelian coalition prided itself on knowledge, on history, on centuries of dominance across countless star systems. Yet this human, fragile, alone, outnumbered, had stood before the entire tribunal and claimed not to be afraid. That alone demanded attention. The galaxy had underestimated humanity, she realized. Perhaps, she thought, the problem was not with humans' weapons or fleets but with their spirit. Salith's aides waited silently at the entrance, bowing their heads. "Princess," one said carefully, "the tribunal is furious. They insist the execution proceed despite your intervention. They call it a breach of protocol." Salith ignored the warning. "They have underestimated us before," she said softly, more to herself than to them. "And they will do so again." "What do you mean, Your Highness?" the aide asked, hesitant. "I mean," she said, turning to face them, "that the human may be the key to understanding something greater, something the coalition has ignored for too long." The aides exchanged glances but said nothing. They had learned long ago that questioning the princess could be dangerous. Salith moved to a small viewing window overlooking the holding chambers where Elias had been placed. The human was pacing, restrained but unbroken, his movements precise and deliberate, each step showing a mind already calculating, already planning. Salith had always believed that physical strength and advanced technology determined superiority. But now she saw another kind of power, one that did not rely on weapons or fleets. It relied on courage, adaptability, and resolve. Humanity had survived countless threats, both from nature and from itself. They had endured catastrophes that would have destroyed most species. Perhaps, Salith considered, their greatest strength was their refusal to surrender, even in the face of impossible odds. She decided to learn more. Over the following days, she pored over ancient records and communications intercepted from human systems. Humans had not been as numerous or as technologically advanced as many species, yet they had persisted, rising each time the universe tried to crush them. Wars, diseases, environmental collapse, internal conflict, each time they emerged stronger and more unified. Meanwhile, Elias remained in his holding chamber, aware of the whispers and glances that followed him. Every guard, every attendant, every visiting diplomat underestimated him. They assumed fear, weakness, or despair. But Elias had learned long ago that survival required patience, observation, and the courage to act when the moment was right. He could feel the tension, the quiet fear beneath their confidence. The same thing Princess Salith had noticed, perhaps, though he could not be certain yet. Days passed in preparation for a public demonstration of power, what the coalition called a lesson to humanity. Elias was to be displayed, humiliated, and then executed before the eyes of multiple species. The tribunal wanted every system in the galaxy to understand that humans were no match for the coalition. They did not expect defiance, and they did not expect intervention. On the day of the event, the enormous chamber was filled with delegates from every major species in the coalition. Elias was brought forth, shackled, yet still upright, his eyes scanning the crowd with sharp intelligence. Murmurs swept through the assembly, a mixture of curiosity and mockery. Many expected a pitiful display, a trembling human begging for mercy. What they got instead was a figure radiating quiet determination. Princess Salith entered at the height of the tribunal's impatience. The assembly quieted as her presence commanded attention. She moved gracefully, her voice steady and clear as she addressed the crowd. "This human," she began, "is under my protection. By ancient law, no harm may come to him while he is claimed by the royal heir." Shock spread through the room. The tribunal hissed, their surprise mixing with outrage. To claim a foreign prisoner so publicly was nearly unheard of, a direct challenge to their authority. But Salith held her ground. She was the heir and the law was clear. She would not be overruled without a fight. Elias met her gaze for the first time. In that moment, he understood that she was not merely an ally by chance. She had seen something in him, something beyond the numbers, the weapons, and the species differences. She had seen the truth of humanity, that their strength was not in their fleets or armor but in their hearts. As the tribunal argued, Salith invited Elias to speak. He stepped forward, his voice calm, carrying through the chamber. "You believe humans are weak, that we can be crushed like insects beneath your feet. You are wrong. Humanity survives because we refuse to surrender. You may take my life, but it will not end the human race. We adapt, we endure, we learn, and we rise always." The words reverberated across the chamber. Some aliens shifted uncomfortably. Many had never heard a species speak with such confidence, so clearly in the face of their judgment. Murmurs rose, some questioning, some admiring. Salith watched carefully, noting the change in the room's energy. The humans' defiance had shifted the balance, even if just slightly. The tribunal attempted to interrupt, their anger rising. "You defy the will of the coalition," one shouted, its voice booming like thunder. "This is an affront to our authority." Salith raised her hand, silencing them. "No, it is a display of truth, a lesson that strength is not only measured in numbers but in will. If you cannot understand that, perhaps it is you who are unprepared for the future." Elias remained calm, his heart steady, though he knew the danger had not passed. The tribunal was furious, plotting in whispers, their plans for subtle revenge already forming. But the intervention had given him time. Time to survive, time to learn, and perhaps time to change the course of history. Over the next days, Salith met with Elias in private, seeking to understand the humans she had once dismissed as fragile. She asked questions about strategy, about survival, about the human mind. Elias spoke of adaptation, of improvisation, of the unexpected advantages humans gain from weakness. She listened intently, fascinated. Through these conversations, a bond formed, not of friendship but of mutual understanding and respect. Salith realized that if the coalition truly understood humans, they might fear them too late. Elias realized that if he could gain her trust, he might survive long enough to warn humanity of the galaxy's growing ambitions. The tribunal continued to plot, and not all within the coalition agreed with Salith's protection of the human. Whispers of assassination, sabotage, and betrayal circulated. Every day was a test, a delicate balance between survival and exposure. Elias had to navigate not only the threats from outside, but the subtle games within the coalition itself. One evening, as the twin suns of the system dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the chamber, Salith spoke quietly. Humans, she said, have a way of surviving that defies logic. You have seen empires rise and fall, civilizations collapse, and yet you endure. Why? Elias looked at her, his gaze steady. Because we do not rely solely on power. We rely on resolve, on creativity, on each other. You may have fleets, technology, centuries of knowledge, but we have something you often underestimate. We have hope, and we never give it up. Salith nodded slowly. She understood now why this one human had faced death without fear. She understood why his species had persisted when so many others had vanished. And she realized that humanity's defiance, its persistence, could change everything. As the days turned into weeks, the tribunal grew restless, and the galaxy began to notice the delay in the execution. Rumors spread, stories of a human who refused to bow and a princess who had defied her own council to protect him. Some laughed, some were incredulous, and some began to fear. Fear of a species they had dismissed for too long. In the private chambers, Elias prepared for the next challenge, knowing it would come. The human mind thrives under pressure, and he had learned to expect the unexpected. Each day brought new threats, new challenges, but also new opportunities. Salith, by his side, had become an ally in a galaxy where true allies were rare. Then, one evening, an urgent alert came. A rival faction within the coalition had begun mobilizing forces near the system, intent on removing both Elias and the princess. The palace was alive with tension, the air thick with warnings and threats. Salith moved quickly, coordinating defenses, but she relied heavily on Elias' insight. Together, they planned, combining alien technology with human ingenuity. Small improvisational tactics, traps, diversions, and psychological maneuvers allowed them to counter a much larger force. Elias watched as the coalition forces approached, outnumbering them nearly 10-1. Yet, even in that hopeless moment, he remained calm. "This is what we do," he said quietly to Salith. "We adapt, we survive, and sometimes we turn the impossible into an advantage." The stage was set for a confrontation that would prove one undeniable truth. Humans are never truly alone. The night was deep and silent, but the tension in the coalition palace was almost unbearable. Guards patrolled every corridor, their alien forms gliding silently across the polished floors. Elia's rook stood beside Princess Salith in her private strategy chamber, observing the holographic display of the rival faction's approaching fleet. The numbers were staggering, ships far larger and more advanced than anything Elias had commanded before. Yet, even in the face of impossible odds, he did not falter. Salith's brow furrowed as she watched him study the display. "They are stronger than we expected," she said, voice tense but calm. "If they breach the outer defenses, everything here could be lost." Elias nodded. "Yes, but strength alone does not win battles. Tactics, improvisation, and understanding the enemy's expectations, that's what counts." Salith raised an eyebrow. "You expect us to fight with what? Human tactics against a fleet 10 times our size?" He smiled faintly, a spark of confidence in his eyes. "Not fight like them. Fight like us. Humans don't always confront power head-on. We use what they don't expect." Over the next hours, they devised a plan. It was risky, perhaps reckless, but it relied on unpredictability, the one element humans excelled at. The palace itself became a trap, with hidden corridors, false signals, and automated defenses programmed to mislead the intruders. The guards were briefed to follow orders precisely, but to trust Elias' instructions, even when they seemed strange. When the enemy fleet arrived, their sensors immediately picked up signs of resistance. But the coalition forces defending the palace were minimal, deliberately so. The invaders advanced confidently, assuming the humans would hide, surrender, or panic. Elias knew that was their greatest mistake. As the first wave of enemy ships breached the outer defenses, Elias activated the first layer of traps. Energy fields that seemed weak were suddenly amplified, forcing ships to reroute, disrupting their formation. Smaller squads of alien soldiers, trained to attack in predictable patterns, found themselves ensnared in corridors that twisted and narrowed unexpectedly. Every move they made was countered by human ingenuity. Salith observed from the balcony above, awe in her eyes. "I have never seen anyone fight like this," she whispered, more to herself than to anyone else. "Even in the Virelian elite units, we rely on strength, numbers, and overwhelming force. This is different." Elias moved quickly through the halls, coordinating the palace's defense. He used simple but effective tricks, redirecting energy to blind sensors, sealing doors to trap small squads, and using gravity shifts to destabilize the intruders. His understanding of human creativity in crisis allowed him to anticipate the enemy's moves before they made them. The first clash occurred in the central atrium, a massive hall with walls of gleaming crystal and steel. Dozens of alien soldiers charged forward, confident in their superiority. Elias waited calmly, observing their patterns, learning their rhythm. Then, with precise timing, he triggered the atrium security system. Holographic projections disoriented the attackers, causing confusion and hesitation. Hidden turrets fired non-lethal but disabling rounds, forcing them to retreat. The alien soldiers were stunned. Never before had they faced such an unpredictable defense. To them it was chaos, yet every move was carefully calculated. To Elias, it was an opportunity. He pressed forward, leading small teams of guards through secret passages, striking swiftly and retreating before the enemy could react. Each success built morale, not only for the palace defenders but for himself. He felt the pulse of the human instinct. Adversity sharpened the mind, forced action, and revealed hidden strengths. Meanwhile, Salith had her own challenges. The rival faction had anticipated that she might interfere and had sent elite operatives to capture her. She moved through the palace with precision, relying on both her authority and training. When she encountered a squad blocking her path, she held her ground. Elias, arriving just in time, whispered directions. They flanked the soldiers, using their opponents' own assumptions against them. It was a dance of strategy and instinct, human and alien tactics blending in a way neither side had expected. As the night wore on, the palace began to feel like a living entity, responding to Elias' commands and Salith's movements. Corridors shifted, doors closed and opened at unexpected moments, and traps activated at perfect timing. The rival faction's confidence began to crack. Their communications were confused, their formations broken. They had expected a display of weakness, a simple victory over a single human and his alien protector. Instead, they were facing ingenuity, courage, and unpredictability in a form they could not comprehend. During a brief lull, Salith and Elias took a moment to assess the situation. "You are remarkable," she admitted, her voice a mix of awe and disbelief. "I have studied hundreds of species, trained alongside the finest warriors, and yet none of it prepared me for this. Your species, you think differently, you act differently, you survive differently." Elias shook his head modestly. "It's not about being remarkable, it's about not giving up, about seeing the opportunity in every danger. That's what humans do. We adapt and we don't surrender. That's the advantage you've seen tonight." Their conversation was interrupted by an alert. Another wave of enemy forces had breached the lower levels of the palace. This time the invaders brought heavier equipment, mech suits and energy cannons designed to crush anything in their path. The palace walls trembled as the machines advanced, confident that the humans were trapped. Elias did not panic. He observed, calculated, and acted. He directed energy to create false readings, causing the mechs to fire at walls and empty corridors. Pressure plates and magnetic fields destabilized their footing. The soldiers controlling the machines were forced to abandon their initial tactics, giving the defenders crucial time to regroup. Salith fought alongside him, her combat training complementing Elia's strategic genius. Together, they created confusion that amplified the human advantage. Small squads of guards struck where the enemy was weakest, exploiting the momentary hesitation and disarray. The palace had become a fortress, but not through sheer power. It had become a maze of unpredictability, where one wrong move could cost the invaders everything. By dawn, the rival faction had suffered significant losses. Their forces were scattered, demoralized, and bewildered. The human, outnumbered in every conceivable way, had turned the palace into a stronghold no amount of brute force could easily breach. Salith observed the battlefield from her balcony, the rising suns casting long shadows across the shattered corridors and strategic traps. She realized something that would change the course of the Coalition's understanding of humanity forever. Humans were not strong because they had superior technology or strength. Humans were strong because they could adapt, think unpredictably, and act when others assumed they would falter. A single human could outwit dozens, outmaneuver hundreds, and change the outcome of an entire engagement. The news of the battle spread quickly across the galaxy. Reports described a human outnumbered 10 to 1, turning a hopeless situation into victory through ingenuity alone. Across alien systems, whispers began to circulate, rumors of the human who could not be defeated by conventional means, who survived because no one could anticipate his next move. The Coalition's leaders convened in an emergency session, their confidence shaken. The tribunal, once certain of human inferiority, began to question their assumptions. Salith presented the facts with clarity and authority, advocating not only for the human's life, but for recognition of humanity's unique strengths. "This is no longer speculation," she told them. "This is proof. Humanity cannot be judged by your traditional measures of power. They survive, they adapt, and they act when others would fall. To dismiss them is to invite disaster." Elias, meanwhile, took a brief moment to rest. He knew the battle was not over. The Coalition would not forget this event, and new challenges were inevitable. Yet he allowed himself a small measure of satisfaction. The human spirit, even in the face of overwhelming numbers, had triumphed. Not by strength, not by weapons, but by ingenuity, courage, and unwavering resolve. Salith joined him quietly. "You have changed everything," she said softly. "The tribunal, the Coalition, they will never see humanity the same way again." Elias nodded. "They will understand soon enough. And when they do, they will realize that one human may be outnumbered, but humanity never is." Together, they looked out over the galaxy from the palace's observation deck. Stars shimmered cold and distant, but in their light, Elias saw possibility. The universe was vast, filled with threats and challenges, but it was also filled with opportunities for those willing to see them. Humanity had survived against impossible odds before, and now, with allies like Princess Salith and the lessons learned tonight, there was no reason to believe they would not continue to do so. The day ended not with triumphal celebration, but with cautious vigilance. The rival faction had retreated, but they would not forget. The Coalition had learned a lesson, but lessons could always be tested again. Elias knew that the future would demand more than courage. It would demand creativity, adaptability, and the unyielding resolve that defined humanity. As the twin suns rose higher, casting light on the battered but victorious palace, Elias felt the quiet pulse of life and survival. He had faced impossible odds and emerged not only alive but respected in ways he had never imagined. Princess Salith's intervention had saved him, but it had also created a partnership that could alter the balance of power in the galaxy. And as the humans watching from distant worlds received word of the events, they too felt a spark of hope. One human had stood against an empire, survived, and changed perception. That was enough to remind the galaxy that humans could not be underestimated, not now, not ever. The stage was set for the next challenge. The rival factions would regroup. The coalition would reconsider its assumptions. And Elias, with Princess Salith at his side, would continue to prove the enduring truth. Human ingenuity and courage were forces that no numbers or weapons could fully overcome. In the quiet aftermath of the battle, amidst the broken corridors and shattered expectations, one undeniable fact remained. The galaxy had begun to recalculate humanity. And it was only just beginning. The galaxy held its breath. Word of the battle at the Coalition Palace had spread like wildfire. Across star systems, alien leaders whispered among themselves, debating the impossible. A single human, outnumbered and alone, had turned what should have been a massacre into a victory. More astonishingly, he had done so with the aid of a Virelian princess, challenging centuries of tradition and authority. The coalition, once confident in their supremacy, now hesitated. Elias Rook stood in the command chamber of the palace, observing the displays that showed fleets mobilizing across the sector. His eyes, sharp and calculating, traced the movements of dozens of alien factions, all reacting to the news of the human who had survived against overwhelming odds. Salith stood beside him, regal and composed, though her mind raced with the implications of the events that had unfolded. Together, they had changed the narrative of the galaxy, but the fight was far from over. "They're gathering forces," Salith said, her voice calm but urgent. Rival factions, coalition generals, even some independent systems, they all see this as a threat now. They underestimate humans, yes, but their fear is growing faster than their armies. Elias nodded. Fear is the first weapon of the weak, and the second is overconfidence. They've already underestimated us, and now they are reacting without planning. That gives us an advantage, one we must use carefully. Over the following days, intelligence reports poured in. Several fleets were converging on key human colonies, hoping to strike before humans could reinforce or coordinate. They believed humans would panic, would crumble, would finally show their true weakness. What they did not know was that humanity had been preparing, quietly, methodically, in ways the galaxy could not anticipate. Elias explained the strategy to Salith, carefully pointing out the strengths and vulnerabilities of each approaching faction. His voice carried the authority of experience, not just in combat but in understanding patterns, anticipating behavior, and exploiting assumptions. "They think their numbers matter," he said. "They don't. Not if we act where they aren't expecting us, not if we force them to make mistakes." Salith studied him, her eyes widening with realization. "You're not just fighting," she said softly. "You're predicting, influencing, controlling the outcome before it even happens." Elias smiled faintly. "That's what humans do. We survive because we learn, because we adapt, because we see opportunity where others see disaster." The first coordinated strike came unexpectedly. Fleets from multiple systems approached a remote human colony, hoping to catch it defenseless. But Elias had anticipated this. Sensors had detected early movement patterns, and automated defenses had been subtly repositioned. By the time the alien forces arrived, they were already in chaos. Missiles were redirected, communication lines scrambled, and decoy fleets created false targets that lured the enemy into traps. On the planet's surface, human defenders used guerrilla tactics, striking from shadows, setting ambushes, and using terrain to their advantage. Every move seemed improvisational, yet every strike had purpose and precision. The alien commanders grew increasingly frustrated. Each attack they had planned, each calculation they had made, crumbled under the weight of unpredictability. Salith observed from the palace's command center, astonished. "I've never seen tactics like this," she whispered. They're reading the battlefield as if it's a living thing." Elias glanced at her. "It is a living thing. Every action, every reaction, everything tells a story. Humans listen to it. We adapt." The second wave targeted a human research station in a distant system, expecting the scientists to hide or surrender. Instead, they found a coordinated defense led by Elia's team. Automated turrets, cleverly hidden squads, and psychological tactics caused the attackers to doubt themselves. Some retreated, others surrendered, unable to reconcile the human ingenuity with their preconceived notions of weakness. Reports continued to arrive: skirmishes, ambushes, defensive victories. Each story echoed the same truth: the galaxy had underestimated humanity, and that underestimation was now a liability. Alien species began to question their assumptions. Discussions in high councils shifted from dismissing humans as inferior to fearing what one species alone had achieved against impossible odds. Salith stood beside Elias, reviewing the incoming reports. "You've changed the perception of an entire galaxy," she said, a note of awe in her voice. "Even our leaders, they are starting to realize we were wrong about your people." Elias shook his head. "Not wrong, just impatient. They judged us too quickly. Humanity survives not because we're perfect, but because we refuse to be defeated." The day of reckoning arrived when a massive fleet from the Coalition's inner circle moved to directly confront the human forces. It was the largest concentration of alien power Elias had ever seen. Hundreds of warships, thousands of soldiers, armed to crush anything in their path. The expectation was clear: humanity would fall, and the galaxy would witness the end of the human resistance. Elias and Salith coordinated a response unlike any the galaxy had seen. They did not meet the enemy directly. Instead, they forced the alien forces to split, using false intelligence, decoys, and misdirection. Human fleets, smaller but faster and more adaptive, struck from unexpected angles. They disabled key systems, forced retreat paths, and created confusion. Alien commanders found themselves reacting to situations they could not predict. On the front lines, human pilots moved with precision and daring, striking where the enemy had assumed there would be no threat. Ground forces used environmental knowledge, improvisation, and psychological tactics to sow panic. Each engagement, though small in isolation, compounded to create a larger strategic advantage. The galaxy watched in disbelief. Meanwhile, Princess Salith acted as both advisor and ambassador. She spoke to the coalition leaders, urging them to recognize the humans' unique strength rather than attempt to crush it. "We cannot defeat them through numbers alone," she explained. "They survive, they adapt, and they act with a unity you have never experienced. To destroy them is to fight against something you cannot measure." The combined human effort, guided by Elia's strategy, forced the coalition to reconsider. They were outmatched not in technology, not in sheer numbers, but in adaptability. Humans did not follow predictable patterns, they created them. They acted when expected to hide. They struck when expected to defend. They survived when expected to fail. Elias addressed the human fleet via communication channels, his voice calm but commanding. "We are not alone," he said. "We fight not just for survival, but for respect, for recognition, and for the truth that humanity cannot be underestimated. Every action we take is for the future of our people and every system that values freedom over fear." The fleet responded with renewed vigor. Coordination improved, defenses strengthened, and strikes became more effective. It was not raw power that won battles that day. It was understanding, foresight, and the unbreakable will of the human spirit. Finally, after days of skirmishes and strategic maneuvers, the coalition convened to negotiate. Leaders who had once sought to dominate humanity now found themselves forced to acknowledge a new reality. The galaxy had changed. One species, underestimated and outnumbered, had demonstrated that survival was not dependent on strength alone but on creativity, courage, and unity. Princess Salith acted as mediator, her voice carrying authority and credibility. "Humans are not our enemies," she declared. They are not prey, nor are they weak. They are equals in resilience, strategy, and determination. To continue aggression is to risk total collapse. To ally with them is to ensure stability. Elias, standing beside her, allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. Humanity had been underestimated, yes, but now the galaxy had seen the truth. Humans were resilient, adaptable, and unstoppable in ways the coalition could no longer ignore. The negotiation concluded with a historic agreement. Human sovereignty was recognized, fleets were acknowledged as legitimate, and interstellar trade and diplomacy were established. Alliances were forged not from fear, but from respect. The galaxy recalculated its assumptions about humanity, understanding that numbers and weapons alone could never dictate outcomes against a species that refused to surrender. Elias returned home, not as a survivor of a battle, but as a symbol of human ingenuity and courage. Across worlds, humans celebrated, inspired by the knowledge that even against impossible odds they could prevail. News of his actions spread quickly, stories of strategy, bravery, and defiance inspiring generations. Princess Salith remained a steadfast ally, bridging the gap between human and alien understanding. Her intervention had saved Elias, but it had also created a partnership that ensured mutual respect and protection. Together, they had altered the course of galactic history. As Elias gazed out at the stars from the command deck of a human fleet flagship, he reflected on the journey. One human had been outnumbered, yes, but humanity was never truly alone. Across colonies, fleets, and allied systems, humans stood united, ready to face whatever challenges the galaxy would throw at them. The galaxy had learned a vital lesson. Humans could be underestimated at their own risk. Strength was not measured in numbers, in size, or in ancient technology. Strength was measured in courage, adaptability, and the refusal to surrender. And so, with the stars stretching endlessly before him, Elias Rook knew that this was only the beginning. Humanity had survived against impossible odds before, and now, recognized by the galaxy, they would thrive. One human had faced overwhelming numbers, and together with allies like Princess Salith, had proven a truth that no force could deny. Humanity endures, humanity adapts, and humanity prevails. The galaxy had changed, and it would never look at humanity the same way again. One human may have been outnumbered, but humanity never was. The human was outnumbered, until the alien princess intervened.